For some of us, I don't think I need to really. I should say that Ray needs no introduction. I was one of the first people I met when I joined the club in 2007, and we had a good weekend together in Norfolk as my introduction to the trips for the club. He was the program secretary at the time. I'm not sure actually when you started to be program secretary. About 2005, he reckons, and he did sterling work. I was saying earlier about we need a new indoor program secretary and a new outdoor program secretary. Ray used to be both. We just used to have one program secretary, but wisely he decided that other people should have a chance to have a go. But it was extremely good. Ray's not only a retired schoolmaster and a dedicated birder, but also an author, and he just published his second book, The Vanishing Mew Gull, and that's the subject of the talk this evening. I can highly recommend it. I was lucky enough to be able to treat myself to it earlier this year, and it's absolutely delightful. I'm just going to quote 2 online reviews as a taster. A very accessible, informative, and generally enjoyable read. I don't think you can say much more than that. And a must-have book for anyone interested in birds. So if you're looking at for a Christmas present for a birder, I do think it's you should look no further. But enough of my sales pitch. I'm going to pass you over now to Ray for what I know is going to be a really fascinating talk. I've done something wrong with the slides, so I didn't realise.
Oh, that's it.
I'll try again.
We've got to get them muddled.
It's not clearly not my evening for the technical side of this. No, no. Right, let's try again. Scratch. The wrong button. There we go. Right. There we are. That look all right,
Thank you,
Billy?
Sally. That's what... Well, good evening, everybody. And I do appreciate too many of you turning up because I've been out of the game for such a long time. I couldn't imagine anyone would want to come and hear the old fogey yet again. It's 2018 since I last stood up and did this, and I promised myself I was going to retire. I retired once now 26 years ago, and then I decided I'd better retire again at 80. It took me until about, I think 84 to get rid of BOC programs and everything else. And I must say too, I must pay tribute to Sue for the work she's done since she took over the program secretary's job, because the program has been marvelous and it's not an easy job, but it's a fun job. And if there's anyone out there who's perhaps thinking of taking it on, please don't hesitate, because I had so much fun doing it. I got to know so many people, and I would never be in a situation where I've had either the courage or the guts to make the effort to get out and put my head above the parapet into the wider world of birds and birding if I hadn't got to know quite a lot of people who circulate in the, I might say, professional hobby. It's just a question of really being able to believe in the possibility. Now, having said that, the object of this evening's talk is this volume, and I'm going to apologize right at the start for the fact that it ain't cheap. And unfortunately, it reflects the fact that when you're an idiot and you sit down and you start having a little bit of a dream, you say to yourself, I wonder if it could be done. You look at the profile of a bird and then you multiply that by nearly 1,100 birds, and you think, am I going to live long enough to do it? Quite seriously, it was an act of faith. And I think, if nothing else, it proved to me that I'm an optimist at the very least, because eventually, at the age of 85, the book hits the market. And I think, well, I'm not unhappy about that, because it means that I've not sat around and just slavered in my chair for umpteen years and done nothing. I can't bird so much as I used to. I can't get out and enjoy the field in the way that I did. But one of the good things I always did, keep a diary of my daily sightings and experiences. And that actually proved to be a remarkable resource, because I was able to dig back in and look at things that I'd seen and done and really relive the experiences which contributed to this. Having said all that, now let's get on with the job. First task that I set about doing was to create a guide to the bird names of the Western Palearctic. I'll explain a bit more about that. That's the plain fact. The title I'll come on to in a little while. I've got to learn to drive this machine next. And as Sally, I think, gave me an instant lesson in doing something, hopefully that will.
Yeah, you can do that.
That will do it.
Or you can use that one, or you could use the keys. Actually, I've forgotten that.
Okay.
But it's entirely up to you.
Right. Thank you. I'll try and muddle through. I'll probably have Sally jumping up and down all evening like that. Right, now, the first thing is that my first venture into authorship was a little bit of a dream, because what I actually felt was that I must explain, I'm a linguist by grounding and a bird watcher by choice and habit. And after a little while, the two came together. Back in the 90s, I made my first trip over to visit relatives in Canada, started to see birds over there, which were very familiar birds, but they had different names, and that threw me. The black-bellied plover, I remember particularly, I had to look up its Latin name in order to be sure it was the same as the grey plover I was seeing at home. And this started me on a great battle of wits between me and my brother-in-law, who'd become very Canadian since he moved there in the 1819. And we were often talking about how we were divided by the same language. And North American English and English are not always terribly compatible. This got me going. And in the end, I became absorbed in the world of birds and bird names. And I saw this originally, this idea, as writing something which would help other people to understand some of the things that I had been baffled by in bird names. At the same time, I thought I'd experiment a little bit with the writing concept of doing something which would help people to take aboard facts at what I call a matey level. As if you're walking around and chatting with your friends on a bird walk, it was a conversational narrative packed full of facts. One or two things that surprised me about it was that some of the critics spotted a feature of that which I had perhaps not expected, that it was quite a useful reference book. I had indexed it. And that really is the root of where I came on to here, with the idea of moving to something which was a straightforward and plain reference. What happened was that after 2016, when Lapwings was published, the whole version of bird names was moving very, very slightly, because there are these international organizations that sit there starting to analyze things and change things, and we get another new name appears, we get a notice in a bird magazine, we get a new edition of a handbook, things are changing. And I remember particularly the gulls used to bother me. When I first retired, I was seeing all these strange gulls in the reports in the magazines, Caspian gulls and Vega gulls and things like this were being mentioned. And what the heck's going on? It was confusing because they were all herring gulls to me in my innocence at this stage. It needed some sorting out and things were still moving on. When I wrote a little update report for the BOC in what was it, about 2021, I realized that things had moved along 5 years to such an extent that it was time to start looking at an update, a revision. And then I thought, well, people suggested that the last book was a good reference book. Let's make this effort a straightforward reference. There's a huge gap in the market. And so this is where where I set myself a challenge. If anyone knows Derbyshire, that's taken from the cable car going up at Matlock Baths, I think it is. My challenge, I thought, well, it's a good picture to represent what I was trying to do, climb the impossible. And this this is what I felt I needed to look at. There was no current publication for this part of the world that actually showed modern taxonomic sequencing. It showed that actually put birds within the family context and explained the constituents part of each bird's name. I had this idea of something like a picture of a bird and round it words about its name which would describe the bird as you would have a picture in a field guide. Put it all together. People hadn't been doing this, and this was really one of the things that I thought might change. Now, this is typical of a field guide. You've got the three birds which are resembling each other, but the firecrest isn't in the same family as the other two. There's no mention of their scientific names on that page. It's not important if you're trying to sort out a firecrest in the field on those other two, or as some of us did on one occasion, tried to sort out the Pallis's warbler down on the Blackwater from the gold crests, etc., etc. This is a field guide approach, and that's not doing much about taxonomy or naming. The range of books available for this type of work are, first of all, fairly specialized and sometimes a little bit dated now. Must say that the left book, The Jobling, is so admirable that I can't really even start to feel I'm in the same sort of area of scholastic achievement, because that man sat down and he's actually produced the scientific explanations for every single bird that's known in the world, not just the specific name, but the not just the generic name, but the specific name as well. The only problem is it's a dictionary. So if you want to look up, for example, something like the mallard, the name is Anas brachyrhynchus. You've got to look under A to understand Anas, and then under B for brachyrhynchus. This is inconvenient. So my idea was to put a lot together. Lockwood, now I say this with great respect because Mr. Lockwood used to sit here in this room with members of our club years ago. He was a BOC member for many years and lectured in German. His specialism was unearthing the linguistic background of some of the quaint and weird names that we created in the past. With the American book, he tried to put a whole lot together. It's a little muddled in its presentation, and Mr. Choate has been dead these 50 years now, so it's showing its date a little bit. He was apparently a schoolmaster, and he did this as a hobby, and I admire everything. He's got some lovely little moments in it. My favorite one is the name of the long-tailed duck. As you probably know, the old name in America was the old score, and that was considered to be extremely non-U. Originally, it meant that the old lady was chattering, and it was echoed by huge numbers of names, which also referred to chattering as being a characteristic of the bird. My favorite was one he quotes, which is somebody actually had registered the name My Aunt Huddy. And I thought it was delightful because I had an auntie who was my Aunt Huddy. She chattered the whole time and she was full of information and she was ever so well loved. And it just amused me. Anyway, coming back to Bo Boland and the Watkins in their Eponym Dictionary of Birds came up with a totally different approach because they tackled the background historically of all eponyms. And if you're not quite sure about eponyms, all the bird names that are related to people. And that is a hot topic at the moment, and that's where I'm going to be finishing really at the end of the evening. Right, I don't think I need to spend too much time going through. I've said what I really need to say about those. Right, the one I didn't mention, and do excuse me, I'm sorry about my voice, but this is one of the reasons I don't do this too often these days. The Australian book that came out in 2015 by Fraser and Gray. Ian Fraser, I think, is a guy who, like me, is an amateur birder who got interested. Jenny Gray is an academic that he actually collaborated with to create this. They actually do exactly what I've set out to do. They've put the taxonomic order in place. They've dealt with each species with all their names, species by species in family order. I have a copy of this. I've had a copy for a long while, but that's the one book I put away while I was writing because I just didn't want to come up with an imitation or a pastiche. It had to be, they were so good, they deserved to be treated with respect. I put them to one side and did things my way. Whether it was a good way or a bad way, the world will have to judge. But it's an interesting one, and I recommend it if you're going to Australia. Right, the project now. Right, the slides are taking a little bit more time to change than I would like. I wanted to look at the most relevant biogeographic zone, which is obviously the Western Palearctic for us. I wanted to look at the taxonomic order because there's been a huge amount of changes going on. I wanted to look at birds by family because obviously the relationships, sequences, and some of the comments might overlap. And I wanted it to be bird-centric. In other words, with the bird as the subject of the conversation about names. And if you want to look them up, you've simply got to find the bird and all the names are there in one place. So that's the idea. Now, the Western Palearctic, I might say, by the way, I had to buy a copyright usage of the actual globe image, but I created my own zoning on it. And if anyone is wanting any map of the Western Palearctic, they're very hard to come by, and the quality and resolution is not great. So do let me know, and it's available if you've got the a need for the use of it. Right, so the Western Palearctic, I've tried to define a little bit in this version, is Europe plus a few bits being the Atlantic islands, which are governed generally or related to Europe, the Azores, the Madeira, Canaries, etc., obviously Iceland and so on. And then the Middle East, which is a very complicated piece of definition there. One of my review critics did comment on the fact that there are different ways of looking at the boundaries in that area. I'm afraid I used the one which most people use, and you know, I don't think many more birds would be added in if I expanded it. North Africa is an arbitrary one, but basically you'll recognize it's all the Mediterranean countries of North Africa, plus a little bit of one or two others which jut out above the Sahara. And the Sahara Desert and the Arabian deserts are really quite clear definitions of the South anyway. So that's the Western Palearctic, and that in itself contains a total of nearly 1,100 species. So now you can really underline the fact that man's totally mad taking this on. It's actually a horrific figure when you look at it. And the answer is, if you work it out, if you about write 5 a day, it's got to take you a little while, isn't it? It did take me a couple of years to wade my way through, and there were other things to do as well. You know, it's like whether you're going to wreck a 60-year-old marriage by doing nothing but this all day long and never conversing with the missus. It's an important part of life. You've got to do other things. But it represents about 10% of the world's bird families. What I then wanted to do was to, and this is in fact an extract from the way I handled the book. I had a big tangle with the publisher. The main publishing editor is not keen on me putting pictures and things as the answer. And right from the start, he said, no pictures. And I said, I said, have some clear indicator pages. And the only excuse for the pictures in here is that they act as markers. So as you flip the book open, there are about 16 sections and about 16 pictures, and you've got bookmarks in there. And once you've used the book a couple of times, it's ever so easy to come in and find this section. So if you want to look up the waxwing, for example, you've got the clear indicator that the group of birds there is marked by that one image. So that was really the process. That's one section of the book which is arbitrarily divided, just simply for the convenience of reference and handling. My apologies, I've jumped a slide. Now, each page, this is actually a facsimile of one of the pages, each page will contain data at the beginning of a family unit. There's data about the birds in general. The word dove and pigeon, dealt with in this case, both have ancient roots, but dove is the older one, and there are historical and cultural reasons why it came into favour, having been out of favour. The Scandinavian countries treated doves with awe and superstition, apparently, but the medieval church treated them with veneration, and the fortune of the word changed accordingly. Pigeon came in as a medieval French word much later for the young bird, and it gradually grew into the English form we know today. In this case, Pallas's gull, white-eyed gull, sooty gull all appear on a single page, closely related birds of the same genus, and the within the gulls, their grouping is the sequence which is used currently by the IOC. Then within each species, I took a typical species entry would be like this, with the name of the bird in full, a quick outline of its context. It's an Eastern European species not recorded in Britain. Now, if you're an ordinary birder coming into the world of birds at step 1, you've got your robins and your blackbirds and your blue tits and things to learn. You go to the next step and you want to know a bit more about. I'm not going to want to convince them that they're going to see one of these flying over their back garden. I want them to be quite sure they don't expect to see this one. Simple note says this is an Eastern European species, or this one is only found in the Mediterranean areas. This one has been recorded once in Britain, you know. And again, the validity of the inclusions or exclusions comes down to the fact of where you are as a lister. And this is an important part of the process. The IOC list formed my baseline. The IOC being the International Ornithological Committee's list, which is an international standard. Now, lists are not simple. They're horribly controversial. And I put the black swan there to remind me of a lovely episode we had on one of those Norfolk trips Sally mentioned earlier. We all sat round in the sitting room one evening making our daily list of what we'd seen. One guy had taken on the job of being the editor and keeping the list dates, and everybody was throwing in things that they'd seen. We went in different cars, sometimes different sites, and so there was a lot of reporting to do. Somebody came up with black swan. Well, one of the purist listers was sitting in the room at the same time. I won't mention any names, but the gentleman concerned became very indignant about the awful sin of including a black swan on our daily list. We had to say in the end, well, yes, this is our trip list. We did see this bird, although it's not recognized by the BOU as a native species or as even a registered feral species, it's still being seen and it can be recorded under that sort of thing. Lists are highly controversial. I had to be a little bit loose in the way I approached it, because there's a lot of fun in this. If you exclude turkey and muscovy duck from your list, saying you can't tick those, yeah, you wouldn't tick a turkey in Britain. But if you go to Germany or Czechoslovakia, there are apparently wild populations running around like pheasants in the countryside. We can tick a pheasant. Why can't we tick a turkey if it's doing that in Czechoslovakia? This is the Western Palearctic list. So a name like that was acceptable. There is a feral population of muscovy duck. They're mostly descended from the domestic version of the muscovy duck. At the same time, if somebody sees that in a park with their kiddies amongst the mallards, they say, that looks different. I wonder what it is. It's a muscovy duck. But the fun for me is the fact that the names are so interesting. They really are. They're full of complexity. Because even in this case, the turkey was a name which came from the Middle Ages after the discovery of North America, and actually was invented by people who used it to mean an exotic bird, something from overseas. It was confused with the guinea fowl originally, they're called turkey birds. They were mainly imported from Africa via Turkish merchants. And the turkey bird became a name used now in France, in fact. They called it, eventually the modern French is dinde, which means from India. It just is an exotic name. Turkey was a curious word, therefore. When the settlers went back to North America, they took with them and imposed this medieval English word for an American bird which had been brought to Europe in the early days of the discovery of North of America. So it's a very odd thing that the actual way language worked. The Turkey's full of stories. Well, anyway, hope it'll be full of stuffing in the next few weeks. The book here I mentioned because I found it great fun. It's been around a few years now, but the point is that this chap was just being totally irreverent about the whole issue of birds and bird names and birding. His father was a very serious lister. He's a comedian. He actually started to take the mickey out of his father a bit, and in the end finished up saying, "Dad, I'll challenge you to a year list." And he started off quite literally by writing down things like the budgies and the chickens he saw around, taking the mickey, but pretending he didn't know any better. He actually then booked himself a holiday in South Africa and went out with a professional birder and came back with an enormous list of exotica and put that into the thing and his father had down. And it was great fun. It's a fun book. Anyway, that's aside. Right. Oops. I'll better explain this strange title of mine. The other book had a strange title, and I thought this one ought to have a strange title too. The real title is A Guide to Birds, the bird named the Western Palearctic. The title, The Vanishing Mew Gull, was what I tended to feel would be quite a good eye catcher. And it's curious that before the book was even published, somebody had picked it up and had picked up one of the pre-publicity statements that I'd made about the gull, had published it on an international birders website, Bird Forum, I think it's called. Look it up, because it's quite fun. It doesn't spend much time talking about my book, but it provoked such a conversation amongst these birders, in America particularly, about bird names, and people clearly were getting hot under the collar about it. It was quite an interesting thought. So it did its job in that respect because it got noticed in America. And that's something my publisher is quite keen that we should always remember, because there is a market out there, and whether or not it's going to interest huge numbers is another matter, but it gets a bit of publicity. Anyway, the point is that the Mew Gull vanished. And what I tried to explain is that this is what happened. Originally, the bird was an Anglo-Saxon name, and it was used literally by the Anglo-Saxons. You can imagine them sitting in their little longboats, rowing or sailing across the North Sea to raid chunks of East Anglia and set up settlement. And they'd look up and say, oh, look, we're getting near the coast, there's a mew. And they used the word in Anglo-Saxon, and it had not changed. It went through the Anglo-Saxon and Viking period safely. And by the way, modern PowerPoint does lovely to see how patched that gull in there. Oh, I was ever so pleased with that. And oops, daisy, gone. Right, and the same thing then, same bird, look, it's still flying around, when the Mayflower sets out and crosses the Atlantic, the word Mew Gull goes to America with settlers. But the interesting thing was, it continued to be used in part in England, but the man called Pennant, a Welshman, who was a very, very important scholar in his era, wrote a book on the natural history of the British Isles, or a series of books, and in these he often created a precedent which remained the bird name for the next generation or two. And he actually preferred to use the word gull. Mew dropped out of usage, and that ceased to be the general English word for this bird. Then John Richardson in the 19th century discovered a new version of a bird in North America, which he called the short-billed mew gull. The mew gull eventually became the formal name, because short-billed mew gull is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? And the mew gull was the normal usage. And because of various international politics, it tended for a long while to be confused. It was a subspecies for most of the 20th century of the common gull, but it was in fact treated as a separate species until probably about 1920 or so, I believe. But the main thing is it was Larus canis brachyrhynchus, subspecies name brachyrhynchus, meaning short bill. Now, fast forward to the 21st century, and about the turn of the century, the IOC, juggling around, decided for some reason or another, the formal international of the English name was to be the Mew Gull. And we had to accept that was what was appearing in the bird books. In fact, if you look, the very new edition of Collins' Bird Guide still has Mew Gull in brackets in the book, although it formally dropped the year before that book was published. The common gull was relegated to British usage. Most birders, probably 99% of British birders, never thought of it as the Mew Gull. It was always the common gull, and that's what we stuck with. But then in 2021, the ornithologists decided to split them and they became two species. And because they were two species, they were treated differently. Ours became formally the common gull again, but the Americans decided that they wanted a new sheet. They got all these old names with Mew Gull and common gull mixed up. They wanted a new set of records to start with a clean version, and they reverted to the old name, dropped the Mew out of it altogether, and called it the short-billed gull. So as a result of this, the word Mew disappeared. And it's very sad in many, many ways because it's such an ancient word, one of the oldest English language words we have. It would have been a museum piece if it had been an artifact. So the actual process is rather sad. That's why I chose it as my title story, because it was really typical of the things that always intrigued me. As you probably recognize, I have a combination. It's not just the language, history, and the science all tangled together in my poor old head. And I get quite excited about some of these things. The making of bird naming, I really wanted to have a quick look at what happened over the years. First of all, it doesn't. Oh, there we go. What I wanted to point out was that the process of English language bird names is really a question of dialect rather than of regional accent, because we were so isolated, the country was split up into so many areas. And I do remember my grandparents were born probably around the 1880 mark. And one of my sets of grandparents came from Norfolk, and the other from what was then called Huntingdonshire. And I grew up in North Essex with these two sets of slightly foreign accents, which were not local, and they had their own dialect and their own inversions of the forms. And the question of regionalism went away eventually with the process of the change of times. You've just got to stop and look at how divided we were when you think that it used to take 4 days, London to York, by horse-drawn carriage, even in the 18th century. So imagine what it was like before then. And right, thanks for coming, Paul. We had a country which was divided up. We had no standard English, no mass literacy, no mass media, regional languages, and even foreign languages in the sense of Cornish and Welsh, with due respect. John over there. It's just a foreign language, isn't it, John? He's ignoring me. I said, yes, the Welsh. Welsh, I just said to a big provocative and trying to wind you up and say Welsh being a foreign language. Anyway, the point being that just out of my logbook, for example, I extracted some of these. And you've got this wonderful range of names. And this is just simply for one species. Regional names collected by Lockwood in that Oxford book of bird names, and look at the range they have and look at the strange structures of them. And some, when you look at them, barrel tit is understandable when you think about the nest of the long-tailed tit, but it's also about the shape of the bird, isn't it? A little round bird. Bottle tits. Now, bottle was the nest. As one of the bottle jug, therefore, bush oven. That's understandable, the oven-shaped nest. But bum towel, this is because the little bird's shape is reminiscent of that stick with a rag on that the Romans used to use. And feather poke, I think, has got the idea of poke being an old word for bag. It's related to pocket. So feather poke is a feathery bag, that's the nest again. Kitty Longtail, I mean, I think it's just sheer poetry, isn't it? It's a lovely one. And there is one of the birds in Australia which has a folk name which is clearly related to that and was transported there. Poke bag, again, that's fairly obvious. He's saying poke, pocket, twice. And poke pudding. Pudding is like dumpling. It's a little endearment word, isn't it? Anyway, we have all of those names for the long-tailed tit. It's as simple as that. And they were natural, spontaneous creations of the ordinary person. The other side of it is the English language itself is a composite language, which has got elements of influence from all of those areas. And we really speak an Anglo-Saxon language, which has been heavily overlaid with French and then Latinized by the Dr. Johnson generation. And we have a highly mixed up, complex language. So there's the evidence of some of the things which happen. Gull, Murrah put in because, although it's the American word, it does come from Cornish to travel to America and is now the international name for the guillemot, whether we like it or not. We shouldn't grumble though, because this guillemot came from French. And that was one of the sort of affectations taken on by pennants. Hawk, dunnock, thrush, and stork all come from plain Anglo-Saxon roots. And the hawk word related to the word havoc in that sense. And havoc seems to be an appropriate link because you have a hawk in the hen house. It would be quite useful. Fulmar comes from a Viking word, which means roughly a foul seabird, because when they tried to take the birds from their nests or the young birds, the Fulmar vomited all over them a foul, oily mess, which was its defense mechanism. Falcon, peregrine, lanner, pigeon, partridge, dozens of them from French, from medieval French. And we'll come back to look at some of that a bit later. Sorry, it either responds rapidly or not at all. Right, so we now have a situation where things are moving on. The ornithologists, like Merritt, Ray, and Pennant, and so on, become what we in modern terms call influencers. They started to change the way people use these. Literacy was building up, particularly in the 19th century. Slowly, things were getting into print. Names were becoming standardized because if they weren't standardized, people didn't know what you're talking about. There were people who collected some of these names, and there was one regular part publication which actually had all the bird names discussed or published as they discussed the bird's habits. These post-Renaissance people were, in many ways, the scholars were very influenced by the classical world. So we started to get Latinisms coming in, and eventually, as I said earlier, the Dr. Johnson vintage of English language becomes heavily Latinized, bringing quite a lot of changes. That's it. And there's our friend Pennant again. He was a huge influence. He wrote a book which created a standard of names which became used by most people, but not all. But his preferences introduced us to words like guillemot, which he preferred to the Cornish word, grebe, which he preferred to the Old English arsefoot, which wasn't particularly, should we say, delightful. And avocet, the old names for the avocet were things like cobbler's awl and mussel cracker and all sorts. No, sorry, that was the oyster catcher. And there are a lot of very strange names. And the avocet was, we say, smoother. He was a little bit of an intellectual snob. He belonged to a generation where he was a classicist in thinking. And there was a time when classical education was you and ordinary vernacular speech was non-you. And ordinary English wouldn't do for many of these people. They had to dress it up. Still neat, of course, don't we? The word gallinule is a typical Pennant's creation. He liked the Latinate version. And because the Americans kept that when they split the moorhen, they kept theirs as the gallinule, the common gallinule. They didn't like moor for various reasons, because they thought moors were only to do with upland areas. But of course, we know better because we've got Ockmoor and Sedgemoor, etc. Moorhens were quite logical in lowland, boggy areas. The BOU was founded in the mid-19th century, and in the process of founding it, Alfred Newton became the chairman, and then he was a very authoritarian type figure, it seems, and the BOU at that stage took over for the formal process of controlling British bird names. Now, by 1894, there was still no standard named across the board internationally. And I just put up this quotation from Richard Sharp, who felt that there should be a more universal system of naming. This is the beginning of the pressure now towards universality. I just popped it at the bottom for a reminder that one of the birds, Pica sharpii, is named after this man, and it's the Iberian green woodpecker, which split not too long ago. In the meantime, of course, Linnaeus had come up with the system of labeling birds in the Latin form, which was good because it's an international language, and it was a simple way of giving a bird a two-word name, which showed the genus and then the specific detail, and that was a form which became slowly popular with the 19th century ornithologists. But once there was an agreement to, did I skip a slide, I believe? Yes, I missed a slide in my preparation. The ISCZN was set up in 1961, in the late 18th century, late 19th century, sorry, and was not ratified until 1961, but that actually gave a formal convention on the biological names of all creatures, plants, etc., etc. Then the International Ornithologist Committee was brought into bear. That had been founded in the late 19th century, brought to bear on the question of standardizing English bird names. And that's still going on, and their changes are fairly regular, unfortunately. And so in the late 20th century, we now have the beginning of the formal set of bird names. And at last, we've got a situation where local and popular names and the spontaneously created folk names gave way to universal scientific labels. And that's rather, shall we say, it's logical, it's practical. They do need international names because Latin is now fading in its importance, and it's a good thing that the English language names are being standardized, or is it? I don't like it. Traditionally, you might have called this a blue start because the start part meant tail. We've got red start. We had wag start in the Middle Ages, became wag tail. And it's now called a red flank blue tail. This is the science. Rather scathingly, Lockwood called them book names. You create a name which tells you in boring descriptive detail that bird's got a red flank, blue tail, it's a red flag, blue tail. And I put that in partly because I'm proud of the fact that I took pictures and I saw the bird. And right, so here we are now in the hands of the boffins. Things have changed. And the IOC today is basing its scientific definitions on the whole issue of what the scientists get up to. They changed the names because they changed the science. As simple as that. The reason being very largely that the 20th century discovered DNA, and the scientists are literally still analyzing the outcomes. And by doing this, they keep coming up with new thoughts. This isn't what we thought it was. This is different from the way it appears to be. And even the IOC called this the taxonomic industry. It's an ongoing. I have my wonder about this. I have this vision of lots and lots of scientists all over the world sitting there in their laboratories, scribbling away at DNA analysis, whilst out there in the world at large, there are thousands and thousands of species of birds which are going to pot. They're not being studied, they're not being conserved. There are fewer field naturalists out there than there are laboratory scientists working on speciation. There's also a lot of development in in fossil studies, and this one was an interesting ancestral form which caused people to realize recently that some 50 odd million years ago, the ancestral parentage of the swifts and hummingbirds coincided. They had a common ancestor. And I was looking at something today which had a wonderful picture of the first clear fossil of a hummingbird. And it was found in Europe, which is an interesting thought. The hummingbirds actually evolved in Europe and then died out for some reason. They still don't understand quite how or why, but one theory related to that is that the disappearance of the hummingbirds left a gap, which in terms of the evolutionary arms race, certain flowers had responded to the evolution of the hummingbirds, and those flowers were left behind, and the sunbirds came in and evolved to fill the vacuum. Very odd. I'm not scientist enough to go further than that. Pigeons and so on are now, we're told, much closer to game birds, and the sequencing therefore shows that. Owls and eagles and hawks and so on are much closer related than they thought 10 years ago. The falcons are now closer to parrots. They've been moved in the sequencing whole strip away from the old hawks and eagles, and they're not related to them closely at all, apparently. Much closer to the parrots. And then there's other goings on. Very recently, I'm talking 2023, the analysis of the genome of the Caradrius plovers discovered that there were one or two differences that need to be sorted out. The Eurasian dotterel, as a consequence, was moved from this family to the other family. And at the same time, the black-fronted dotterel in Australia, which had its own genus, the Alcyornis it was called, moved into Caradrius. It's very, very complex, and it's hard to keep up with what is going on the whole time. Right, have a look at this. This is the sort of thing that gets me sometimes with bird names. This used to be called the black-eared wheatear, and it was split in recent analysis into two forms, the western black-eared wheatear and the eastern black-eared wheatear. Now, isn't that clumsy? And in any case, what does western mean? What does eastern mean? If you're an American, you've got to actually know that it refers to the Mediterranean, and Hispanica might give you a clue. The western part of the Mediterranean includes Spain, and this is a contextually strange way of naming birds, in my view. Is it the common chaffinch? Into the picture, there he is. That was recently changed. It stopped being the common chaffinch because the scientists had analysed the whole complex of chaffinches through the swathe of Europe and North Africa and the Mediterranean islands, and they've now split them. This is the European chaffinch because it's the northern part of the sector of the family. And at the same time, they've now created 4 new chaffinch species, which are, as you can see, visually all fairly dissimilar. But our word, common chaffinch, no longer applies. It's the European chaffinch, and that happened last year. It's very, very recent. Right, now I want to talk a little bit about the thing which really got me started, this question of linguistic archaeology. This is the days where we used to take the grandkids down to the Silchester digs, by the way. Loved it, loved the experiences. And my granddaughter was home visiting the other day, and she said, wanted to introduce her boyfriend to a local thing. She said, can we go down to Silchester? I had lovely memories of it. Right, anyway, let's have a look at the way the crane's name works. The common roots of our European languages, we have many, many common grounds with many languages through Europe, not all, but this Germanic thread has the word krano. Krano as a root evolves over the period of time into Nordic forms with a t sound replacing the k sound, sound being held here, and of course becoming the k with the c in the English version. What then happens was you've got the Greek version, which is Geranos. If you look, Krano and Geranos are not that similar in sound. They're clearly related. The Geranos word loses bits and becomes grus in Latin, which is grus grus, the Latin name for the species now. When you move on from that, if we can move on from that, you finish up with the origin of the language forms of the so-called Romance languages in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and so on. And you've got the clear root of grus becoming something which is clearly recognizable. Yet, when you compare the Romance forms with the Germanic forms, they're now so vastly different. This is what I love about language. These two words don't look at all alike, but they have a common root, which works like that. The old French dialect word aigrette loses its H and then gains the diminutive suffix E-double-T-E, aigrette, and that translates to English as egret. So heron and egret are the same word. It's very curious, isn't it? This is, I put this one in. My daughter was in Portugal recently on holiday and she photographed a hoopoe for me. Out for a walk with her phone, as one does when one's not a birder. And I put this in because it's fascinating to me here, the various aspects of the language. Upupa epops is a mixture of Latin and Greek. That's both say the same thing, the bird makes a funny sound. It becomes hup in medieval French and then leads through to our word hoopoe. But it's interesting seeing the word pupa, the Portuguese word I happen to put in there, and as a representative of what changes come about. It clearly has the roots in upupa, but then it reminded me that one of the strange little stories in bird names is that of the dung bird. A man called Walter Charlton in the 18th century was actually collating English bird names. For some reason, he came up with this. It was only used by him and only used for a very short period. The dung bird was a word which clearly related to the fact that young hoopoes actually defend themselves in the nest against predators by ejaculating their foul feces all over any would-be attacker. And the result is that somewhere along the line, it finishes up as the dung bird in English, but no one ever used it. No one ever uses it. Where did he get it from? And in fact, the origin of the word, I did a little bit of old dictionary work, and found out that there are two words which actually fit the bill in French dialect, very rural usage, the coq merdeux. literally the shitty bird. And it's a simple process of saying, well, okay, why on earth did Charlton decide to bring that one to the world's attention? Very curious. I put this one in, it's an old classic. The northern wheatear is called Ananthe because it appeared to Aristotle and co. at vine blossom time. But then you've got the equivalent in modern birding technologies. Birds turned up, I think, once in the WP record, and it appeared as a very rare vagrant. It got on the Western Palearctic list, but its name, which I thought was very, very odd, actually refers to the wheat planting season. And it's an exact parallel to that in Ananthe, the vine blossom season, really. And it only stopped off in Japan on migration. So they actually only see it in the autumn when they're planting the wheat. So if you wonder why Mugimaki, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the issue of the red poles. We have read in the paper recently that they're going to be relumped, one of the decisions which I'll talk about in a minute. But the word cabaret, which is the subspecies name, Jobling gives us that and says it's a French word of French origin. That doesn't do me because French is my territory, and I went in and I did quite a lot of searching in some old dictionaries online before I found out exactly what it was about. And so I have, in fact, I think probably just made one little inroad into the mysteries here. Move the slide on. Here we go. Cabaret is originally, in the way we would understand it, a sort of cafe, a bistro, a restaurant is a word in that genre. But in the further usage, in the back end of a dictionary, I find a local name for a plant called the cabaret des oiseaux, which is literally meaning a feeding place for the birds. And we understand that diesel, which is what it is a very good food plant for many finches. This one I loved. I thought this was great. I came across, I had not seen this bird, and I came across this story. I thought, Pudobe, where did they get that from? And Jobling goes through very carefully and explains to us that it comes from colonial African French, and it means Pudobe, which means actually daubed skin. Okay, fair enough. But something itched in my head and said, that's not good enough because when it comes down to it, the French does not work that way. It doesn't mean daubed with black, it only means daubed with white. So it's to do with whitewashing. And I don't suppose anyone would have any hesitation about recognizing that one. But the point about whitewashing is that when you look at the bird from a different angle, you can see why it's daubed with white. It's got these white tail feathers, and it's very, very clearly that somewhere along the line, somebody somewhere historically in Africa created this lovely little name. Bird is daubed with white. Right, one other name that I loved and I found very fascinating, Mr. Claw. The name Clotbe looks such a strange and clumsy Latinism, and it is made up of the two parts. And Mr. Claw became Bey under the Turkish rulers, and so he gets the name Clotbe awarded by Bonaparte. I realise we're running short of time now, so I must wind up fairly quickly. I'm going to jump through several bits here because there's one thing I want to come to. Right, the ongoing issues. First of all, the IOC reviews regularly change things. And during this year, since the book came out, the red grouse has been split from the willow ptarmigan and is now forming a separate species. While on the other hand, the cattle egret has been moved from the genus Bubulcus into the genus Ardea. So it's actually now in the same genus as the conventional grey heron, which is a bit of a surprise, really. Second issue is that new species will appear and they'll add themselves to the Western Palearctic. There have been 3 new species that I've been able to pick up reported. The Indian oriole, what's he called? Burrows petrel, I think it is, and the Himalayan vulture have all been seen in various parts of the Western Palearctic for the first time. And then the harmonization. This is the big issue currently, really. The IOC and the other agencies which control speciation of bird names are all talking furiously at the moment, trying to come up with common ground. That's why the red polls have been lumped. I see that whimbrels are threatened. That's the American Hudsonian whimbrel, and it may very well be lumped again with ours. And lastly, eponymosity, what I created, I'm afraid. I apologize for that. It's animosity towards eponyms. It's the American thing, and you've probably been reading about it in some of your articles in your bird magazines. When it comes down to it, eponyms have been around since the system was created. Aristotle got his name attached in the early days. The most recent one is one I think is delightful. Mrs. Waugh, she's probably still alive. She's but my age, I gather. And she worked at the Natural History Museum, helped a researcher with his work, and when they split the bird, they gave her the honor of its name. But the Americans have now started to get worried about their cultural issues. Too much in the 19th century, when birds were being named, was controlled by white males, colonialists, slave owners, etc. And so those are some of the issues which are being discussed. And Audubon is one of the big targets because he kept slaves for a few years. But you compare him with this man who was responsible for horrific genocides, had a bird named after him. I'd take that one away from him without a blink. He had nothing to do with ornithology whatsoever. Horrible behavior, apparently, and he made no contributions to ornithology except nickname, which I thought was delightful. He was apparently a very pedantic old man. But this one surprised me. The Baltimore oriole was named by Catesby because its colours were those of the arms of the Baltimore family, not actually named after a person as such, named after the family. I don't know what they do about that. It's not named after the city. It probably somebody will cotton on to that and modify it. Alexander Wilson, Wilson Phalarope, Wilson Snipe, etc., Scottish American, hugely respected. He's going to be wiped out, apparently, because they're going to wipe everybody out. And that is right. And a blackburn will be wiped out, the Blackburnian warbler. She is sort of Mary Anning of the generation, a pioneer naturalist, the most unusual personage in her own right. And British, she doesn't matter, therefore, and out will go that, apparently. And I think that will be something of a shame. Right, Corey is going to be an interesting one because apparently, although he's an American name, an American business, the birds don't actually nest in American territory. So he may get away with it. I put this one in because I took a photograph of Baird Sandpiper, and I just like the fact poor old Baird is going to go by the board, and he was just an ornithologist working in a museum. So the Americans say it's too complex to pick and choose, so we erase and replace all eponyms, and we'll use names that reflect a bird's appearance or its habitat. And then that sets me thinking. Your appearance and habitat, you've got about 6 gulls to rename to start with. Imagine that, black, white, grey. There's plenty to go on, isn't there? Sea, rocks, cliffs. No, I don't want that one. Black-throated blue warblers, love those. I hate that sort of name. It's a real hang-up with me. And nobody has actually thought about the fact that all but perhaps sorrel rail and dowitcher amongst the American native names have been wiped off by these 19th century white ornithologists. But when I look at the British situation and the Western Palearctic situation, the number of names which are eponyms are not numerous. And I put these into this category simply for the reason that it's my experience here. I've seen the green ones, the top 6, in Britain. I've seen the blue ones on the continent, and I've seen the last one outside Europe. So when it comes down to it, the number of species that are likely to pop up are not great. And I've just listed a few of the others. I certainly would be absolutely horrified to see white thrush go down the drain. Now, one last thought is that if you want a Christmas activity, just sit and put your moral litmus test onto a bit of research onto all of those people. One of the birding magazines a while ago said something about old fogies, who the heck was Pallas? I thought that was a very slack piece of journalism. Pallas is one of the great explorer naturalists and certainly doesn't deserve to be maltreated like that. So, what? This response is not, there we go. And you'll be pleased. That's not a sunset, it's a sunrise. I said I'm an optimist. That's a BOC trip. That was Farnham Marshes at 7:15 or thereabouts on a February morning, and cold as you could wish. And Harry and Lynn Matthews, and I believe John you were in there somewhere, John Lapinia. We're walking around looking for something in the breakfast bit. But my challenge is, where do we go from here? There's going to be changes. There'll be a lot going on, and I'm absolutely exhausted, and I apologise. We were stopped there. So I'll leave you with those things to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wayne. That was absolutely fascinating. You want to have a sit down, while you?
Thanks. I really am. I'm not used to working.
What do you say? 85 now, or
86?
86. Well done. Oh, you got a thumbs up for me and Ian on here, I can see. That was absolutely brilliant. I found that really interesting.
Thank you. I apologise. I was really draining it.
Oh, well, thank you for getting there, and thank you for doing it. Right, have we got any questions from here in the room first? Right, Debbie.
Ray, are we going through the same brief with mammals as well, and fish and butterflies?
Let me just repeat the question, because otherwise
yes.
Debbie just wants to know if we're going through the same pain with same problem with mammals, fish, butterflies, other species.
Yeah. I think there has already been some activity in one of the horticultural organisations to do away with some nasty names. But you think about it, go in the garden and prune your futures, your banksias, your dahlias, and so on and so forth. They're everywhere. Eponyms, I mean, you put on your wellies to go into the garden, don't you? Eponyms are everywhere, and they're a legitimate part of the language. If they try to take them out of the scientific names, it's a different organisation responsible. It's the ISZN. Americans have no authority over that. And technically, they have no authority over anything outside the immediate American remit. It's going to be an interesting thought, isn't it?
Neil.
I can find that by way of comment. Nobody has any authority over natural names. Correct? Organisation, not natural names. That's names being handed out by this self-appointed committee.
Yes.
Who kind of gave himself a bit of false authority. There's the International Ornithological Congress, these years. They use the initial IOC, they're actually the International Ornithological Committee.
Yes.
They weren't actually part of the Congress. And they did start originally as a sort of, ironically, American cultural imperialist attempt to impose their English names upon the English-speaking world, bearing in mind that there were different names on the Indian subcontinent, in Britain, the so-called Old Commonwealth, and in North America, going down particularly well. That's kind of morphed somehow. Its main activity is actually the scientific classification of birds.
Yes.
By bringing together those four organizations,
yes,
try and get agreement. The fact that some American academic wants to rename all the national names in North America doesn't mean to say you have to follow them.
Absolutely not.
And any author, if they're going to write a book like them, can simply say, well, I think my publisher doesn't like it, and I'll go to another publisher, I'll use my names. Why didn't I use the international scientific name?
Yes.
Then everybody will know what I'm doing.
If you're writing a scientific paper, you've got to have continuity. But if you're an ordinary Joe wandering around with your binoculars around your neck, it doesn't matter. Remember a few years ago, the wren became the winter wren because some American scientists said that they were all one species. And then they said, oh, no, they're not. It's the Eurasian wren, the winter wren, and now we've got the Pacific wren. And there are actually three species. This is one of the problems that we're up against. But I don't think any of us stopped talking about the wren. I don't think anyone ever called it a winter wren, did they? No one in their right mind would call common gull a mew gull, which is where I came in at the beginning. And appreciate the fact that the BOU have kept their own names, but when it comes to agreement on speciation and taxonomy, then the organizations have got to get their act together because it's a bit muddled otherwise. I haven't entered on to the question of what a species is in the eyes of some, but the organizations have different views on this. And I've often quoted a famous article by Nigel Collar, which he used in before one of the articles in British Birds, which is a bird is what I say, or species is what I say it is. And it's a question of the scientists have their own factions and angles on these matters. When they get their act together, the book, such as I've written, will have to be completely rewritten anyway. It's one of those strange things.
That's a whole difference. That's another lecture entirely. Right?
Entirely, absolutely.
Can I just apologise to the people on Zoom? I wasn't quick enough to give Neil the microphone, but essentially Ray has pretty much he summarised very well what Neil had just said, which the people on Zoom had missed. Except that he didn't miss the very first thing you said, which was that it's up to us what we call our birds, the vernacular names rather than the scientific names.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to get excited by this eponym fever, which the Americans have been bitten by. It's nonsense. So, sort of like a social disease almost.
Any more questions from in the room? Anybody? Oh, do you want to use the mic?
Unfortunately, its retail price is 65 quid, which is abominable, but it reflects the amount of time that we had to spend editing it. Unfortunately, it was complex. But I buy them at author's discount price and can let them go for 45. So that's available if anyone wants them. I've got a couple here now, and I've got some leaflets if anyone wants to go and think about it. But if you want it in time for Christmas, you'd have to contact me very quickly so that I can get them ordered and delivered to you. But otherwise, I'm not in the market to try. It's their business to market them. Mine is to actually just do it. But good luck to you if you wish to have one.
Sounded like enough work anyway. Any other questions? Anybody on? Oh, there's one at the back. Is it going to be a long question? I'll give you the mic.
You know what crane means?
Do you know what crane means?
Crane. Well, it has no, to my reckoning, it has no obvious meaning. The crane as a mechanical device was named after the bird in the same way that the kite as a toy was named after the bird. But what the original meaning was, say, to the Greeks and to the ancients, is not stated as far as I can see. It is a name for the bird. As simple as that.
Right, anybody on Zoom got any questions?
Just is the presentation available to download?
Is the presentation available to download? We will be releasing the recording.
Yes. As far as I'm concerned, it's public property.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Right, the answer will be yes. If they wants to contact us. Right. Well, unless there's anything. Oh, I've got one question. I hate to. Well, I probably shouldn't ask, but what's next, Ray? Is that it? It's probably the wrong time of night to ask you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I must admit that when we finished the first book, Hugh Brazier, who'd edited it with me, actually met me at the bird fair, and he said, "What are you doing next?" I said, "Nothing ever. I've had it. I promise." I just went away and then and sort of faded for a few years, and then, quite honestly, it was lockdown. I got bored stiff. I'd had an illness the year before the pandemic. Then my wife had to have hip and knee replacements. We were ever so slowed down. I'm sitting around for hours indoors, and I can't go out birding anymore. I really needed something to do, and that's how it grew.
All right. Well, thank you again, Ray. That was absolutely wonderful talk.